Welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys for hanging with me on this Easter Sunday. So I've been out on the water the last 3 days, sun up to sundown the last 2 days. And I will tell you, post-spawn fishing is so much different than pre-spawn fishing. You really have to take everything that you were doing a month ago and throw it out the window, because if you try to hang on to all those baits that you were confident in March, February, you're really going to struggle this time of year. And I think that's something that I do pretty bad. I like catching them on a lipless. I like catching them on a lot of those really good pre-spawn baits, and they're not all going to work. And some baits that don't work hardly at all in February and March are your best baits now. So the last 2 days, I have figured out that even with sun, not a whole lot of cloud cover, the spinner bait is something you always need to try in April, because a lot of times, not just big prolific shad spawns will go on, but you will also catch the very beginning of the shad spawn. So I like willow leaves anytime the water is above 70 degrees. I like a little bit clearer water when I'm throwing a willow leaf, but this is a great combination for the month of April, because you will find on every lake a shad spawn will be going on in different portions of the lake. So one day it may be just on the lower end, then the next day the lower end may be fizzling off or getting stronger, but it's changing up the lake, it's starting. So I figured out mid-lake on Guntersville, we were starting to see a little bit of a shad spawn at night. The last 30 minutes of the day, we saw them schooling, we saw bait just flickering everywhere. And we picked up a spinner bait, bam, caught the biggest fish we had caught all day. So went with that the next day, and we could throw this spinner bait pretty much everywhere and get bites as long as we had a little bit of wind. So the spinner bait is something I haven't caught a whole lot of fish on pre-spawn this year, but now it is a big player. So when the spinnerbait bite would fizzle off because the wind would die down, the water is a little bit too clear to catch them on it without wind. So that's when I like to go to a swim jig. So another really good shad spawn imitator, really good shad spawn bait is a swim jig and a square bill crankbait. We were fishing around a lot of grass, so it's getting pretty close to the surface. So it'd be a little too hard to fish that square bill through there. So a swim bait with a swim jig rather, with a swim bait trailer is my next favorite option. I still keep it as white and as shad natural colors as I possibly can, but that was going to work on those same spots that we were catching them. And again, you need those conditions. You need a little bit of wind, you need a little bit of color in the water. If you don't have that, fall back on all your other April techniques. So I like a frog early in the year. I've talked a lot about this recently. I was fishing this around matted vegetation, anywhere where we saw primrose, and we weren't getting a lot of bites on this. This wasn't a super consistent thing, but this was a little bit better fish when you did get a bite on it, like a frog typically always is. So this was 1 or 2 bites a day. Super inconsistent, worked some places, didn't work other places. It was strictly for one bite that you needed to get rid of a small fish or whatever. And then the consistent technique, but was consistently 2 pounds, 2.5. I think we caught some 3-pounders on a wacky rig. But again, we were talking about a lot of fish on the lake are spawning, or excuse me, a lot of fish are spawning, yes, but also the shad are starting to spawn too. So I'm going more my natural shad patterns. I'm not so much brim guarding, the females guarding the nest or the males. And most of the fish I was catching off beds were males. There just weren't a whole lot of females. I don't know if it's because we're, a week away from the full moon or we're past it or whatever, but I'm all about shad when I'm seeing shad everywhere. So that is a Senko in a shad color 1/0 split shot drop shot hook spinning rod, so I can skip it. But that was my more consistent to get some numbers in the boat. But I will say the wacky rig thing, some parts of the lake you're going to catch 2-pounders, and then some parts of the lake you're going to catch 2.5 to 2 3/4 pounders. So if you're going to go with that wacky rig and really commit to it, which I've said this a lot, I feel like in the month of April you can have 10 rods on your deck with crankbaits and spinner baits and Carolina rigs, And then you can have one rod, a wacky rig, and the gamble is throw the wacky rig all day. You're probably going to be just as consistent as you are with those 10 rods. So if you're fishing out of someone else's boat, I would say just throw a wacky rig all day in the month of April. If you're calling the shots, you get to decide where to go. Maybe not throw a wacky rig all day. But I would also say that there's going to be some days where you get off the water and thinking probably should just throw in the wacky rig all day. But again, when you are wacky rig fishing, there's going to be a couple different size class bass, even if you're not catching any big ones, which we didn't see any big ones caught on the wacky rig the last 3 days. There's a difference. There's some 2 3/4 pounders somewhere biting it. They're not all going to be 2-pounders. So if the wacky rig is a big part of your day, go look for the best size fish you can catch. I know that's obvious, but you may think every fish on the lake that bites a wacky rig is 2 pounds. That's not true. There are some that are a lot closer to 3 pounds than just 2 pounds. So that's basically what I've been doing. All these baits are not baits that I typically catch fish on in February and March. You've got to change a little bit. I know they'll probably bite a crankbait, which you catch a lot of fish on in February and March. I know they'll bite a chatterbait, but I like to try to get away from a lot of those baits that the fish have seen a lot. But again, it's all about figuring out the forage this time of year. I don't necessarily think that is as important in the pre-spawn. Yeah, if they're biting crayfish, you want a crayfish colored crankbait. If they're biting, shad, or they're feeding on whatever, yeah, but this time of year, shad are king when the shad are spawning. And that is going to happen anytime you have low light, first thing in the morning, the last hour of the day, and have something shad related. And then if you want to drag a Carolina rig underneath the fish that are schooling or whatever, that can also work. But make sure you have plenty of stuff imitating shad in your boat. Try that, guys. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.